And we are recording Mr. Jared Woodfill on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022. And you have the patience of a god, which I tell way too many guests, which I think is probably indicative of myself. But Mr. Woodfill, please introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Well, Tommy, it's great to be with you. My name is Jared Woodfill. I am the attorney for the Methodist plaintiffs and a whole host of plaintiffs across the country who are standing up against these unconstitutional vaccine mandates we're seeing at every level, whether it be the local level, the state level, or the federal level. We're also representing a whole host of individuals that are standing up for their religious liberties because they're being denied religious exemptions and medical exemptions. We really started early on in this COVID-19 jurisprudence or litigation, as I call it, by taking on these unconstitutional lockdowns that we saw, not just in Texas, but all across the country. A lot of folks don't realize what was happening in Texas early on, but we had similar measures like those that we saw in the more liberal states, where our governor actually put executive orders in place that locked individuals down, shut down businesses, put them in masks, you name it. So we've been standing with individuals all across the country, specifically here in Texas in large numbers, trying to fight these unconstitutional mandates, and we will be successful.
So what do people, so I guess it's just kind of a divine intervention that we're doing this now, because in the last 2 weeks, I've interviewed two doctors who have lost their jobs because of this. Dr. Meryl Nass, an internist who's been an internist for I think 33 years up in the state of Maine, absolutely brilliant. She had her license suspended and is being required to do a psychological exam because of 4 things. She prescribed ivermectin, she prescribed hydroxychloroquine, and 2 counts of spreading harmful misinformation. Dr. Paul Merrick, who I interviewed on Tuesday, a quadruple board certified physician, was forced by his hospital to stop prescribing ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and other early treatment protocol drugs, and was forced to watch 7 of his patients die from COVID, the youngest of whom was 31, which is also my age. I talked last night to Dr. Latulip, who Air Force veteran, lost his job and had his license revoked in I think late 2020 or early 2021 because he wasn't using masks in his practice. And actually a fourth, Dr. Eddie Bowers, a National Guard surgeon, I believe, who lost his job because he wouldn't take the vaccine. They're very, very effective. I mean, you have to respect the enemy. They're very effective, right? You don't have to take on everyone. You just need to make an example out of a few prominent people. And you got to let them know you can touch them, right? Not just me, not just the nurse. I mean, you got to take down a doctor. The rest of the doctors take note. How do these people get help? How do they band together? Because this is I'm trying to keep my language PG. It's not right what they're doing. It's horrific. It goes against every medical ethic. It goes against the Nuremberg Code with informed consent and coercion. It goes against every rule about doctors being able to use drugs off label. What do these people even begin to do?
Well, you nailed it. I mean, the goal of the other side is to make an example of a few individuals in order to quiet or shut up those who are in the same situation who want to take a stand, but they just don't have the courage quite yet. And then they see someone who does do what they want to do get knocked down and attacked. And in many cases, unfortunately, it causes them to sit down and shut up. But thank God we do have folks like Dr. Merrick who has not backed down. And we've been working with him on some of our cases. And another great example is Dr. Peter McCullough, who I know has been on your show. And he's been working with us as an expert witness in a lot of our cases. But again, they came after him. Yeah. And he didn't sit down and shut up. Instead, he got more vocal and he got more louder and more strong in his position and standing for truth and justice and what is right. And so the whole secret to defeat these individuals is to stand up and speak up, refuse to be quiet, and let your voice be heard, because the worst thing you can do is allow them to intimidate you into silence, to beat you into submission. And that's really what they're trying to do. I mean, they do it in all industries. They do it in the legal industry. They do it in with the doctors that you're talking about. We've clearly seen it with nurses. We've seen it with individuals who are working for businesses who don't want to take the shot. And then those businesses attack them. They vilify them. They make them feel like there's something wrong with them. So that is the goal of this politically correct narrative that they're pushing that is inconsistent with the science is to get these folks, beat them into submission so they will not stand up and assert their rights. And they have a lot of rights under the law. And we've seen those rights trampled on at the national level, at the state level, and at the local level. And that's where we need to go to battle. We need to go to battle in the courts and all of those levels. And we need to stand up and speak up.
Is there any precedent for what's going on right now?
Great question. And so I was talking to someone about that today. So we have a case right now that's going to the Fifth Circuit. It involves the Methodist nurses. You may remember that. It was really the first lawsuit filed. We were in front of a trial judge. Federal trial judge decided that there wasn't a cause of action under the law. And so he granted what's called a 12B6 motion to dismiss. We have that now in front of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, which is a very conservative circuit. And so I think we have a good opportunity of being successful there. And so when you talk about precedents, the answer is no. We are developing this jurisprudence with respect to COVID-19, whether it be the shot, whether it be the lockdowns, you name it. Now, there's case law that they try to rely on, like Jacobson versus Massachusetts from the early 1900s, and other cases that really are not applicable to the situation that we're in right now. Because as you know, this particular drug that we're talking about here has been administered in large part under the EUA status, the emergency use authorization status. And that puts it in a very different category than any drug that is really approved by the FDA. This drug hadn't been technically approved by the FDA. They want to pawn it off and say it has been, but we know that typically that process is many, many years in the making. And even though they've got that so-called approval, I think there's a big argument to be made that it's an approval / non-approval. So we are developing the jurisprudence in this area right now. And over time, as the science continues to develop cases and the law is starting to swing more in our favor. So if you were to file something, or when we started filing things back in, April, May, June, July, 2020, and then into early 2021, the judges were, in almost all cases, were taking a very different approach to the litigation that we are pursuing than they are now. And so one of the case that we have with the Methodist nurses, we've asked the Texas Supreme Court to look at it. So when you go to the Fifth Circuit, you can do something called certifying the question. So we're certifying the question and asking the Fifth Circuit to send it over to the Texas Supreme Court to determine what state law should be. So here's why that's important. Texas and many states are employment at will states, meaning that you can fire someone for any reason unless there's an exception carved out, whether that's carved out by a statute or by a court decision from the highest court of that state. In Texas, because this is a case of first impression, we don't actually have our legislature passing a statute with respect to these shots, but we do have a whole host of executive orders that say you can't force individuals to take the jab, that you can't force individuals to have these vaccine passports. We have a lot of good executive orders that help us to argue in front of the Texas Supreme Court that there should be a public policy exception created to the employment at will doctrine that says you can't force someone to take the COVID-19 jab as a condition for employment. So we are hopeful, and we believe that the public policy behind this is consistent with our view, and that the law is consistent with our view, and that the Texas Supreme Court will ultimately carve out an exception to the employment at will doctrine for that fact pattern.
So for there not being precedents and, nothing carved out, no exceptions, makes sense, right? Because this hasn't been around for long. But could you not possibly draw a parallel between the EUA? Could there not be a legal EUA, if you will? Like, sure, there's a reason why no one's ever used this drug, and there's a reason why there's normally phase 1, 2, and 3 FDA clinical trials take 15 years, $1.5 billion. And the reason we didn't do it is because warp speed, pandemic, you kind of got to throw stuff off the side. All right, sure. Well, just leave that there. Could you not argue then there has to be a legal parallel to that? Be like, all right, this is granted, it's very weird, right after 9/11, the passing of the Patriot Act and the NSA's broad surveillance powers, but you also had kind of an uptick in the FISA courts. It's like, okay, we can do this thing, but there has to be parallel EUAs. There has to be, well, now we're going to have emergency legal authorizations. And if you're not okay with that, well, then you can't have the other. So like fighter jets, like I just finished a book about 9/11, had on the author, so it's fresh in my mind. Like fighter jets streaking over lower Manhattan on the evening of September 11th, or police with, fully automatic weapons on the lawn of the White House on September 12th. Stuff that you have to do. We're under attack, but there also were like, there has to be, that we can't let this go unchecked. It can't go on forever. We have to have these legal things. Is there such thing as a sort of legal EU way to say, this is brand new, it's a pandemic, I get it, but you can't just throw people into this and say, you got to take the jab. There has to be a sort of exception, because if we're only doing exception for one thing, people might not believe this, but the companies profiting off of this one thing might abuse it. So is there any reality in that, or is that just wishful thinking?
No, you hit the nail on the head, because actually federal law addresses that. You look at 21 USC section 360 triple B, it makes it very clear that when you have a drug that's in the EUA status, that you have to give informed consent. And what does that mean? That means that as you go and look at the detail of that particular statute, it says the individual has to have the opportunity to accept or reject the product or the drug that's in the EUA status. There's also a code of federal regulations which says that you cannot use coercion or undue influence to get someone to take the drug that's in the EUA status. So it's our position that if their job is contingent upon it, if the ability to put food on the table, to make their house note, their light note, you name it, is contingent upon them taking an experimental drug, then that is not informed consent. Clearly, it is coercion and undue influence. If you say to someone that if you want to keep this job, that if you want to be able to put food on the table for your children and to continue to live in that house, you got to take that shot. That's undue influence. That's coercion. And so that's one of the arguments that we're making at the federal level, and really in all of our cases, to say that this is what the law says. Now, what happens is the other side, like some of these hospitals and employers all across the country, are running from it and saying, well, that language only applies to the exact group that is administering the shot or the EUA product. So they try to make this subtle distinction to say, well, we're not the ones actually administering it. We're just an employer, and therefore that doesn't apply to us. And so that's the battle we're having right now in the federal courts. But regardless of whether or not that particular statute applies to the employer, we still believe that there are a whole host of great policy arguments that are consistent with that language that would encourage or persuade the Texas Supreme Court or any state court to carve out an exception to the employment at will doctrine based on the unique set of facts that we're dealing with here, that and that our position is consistent with the federal law and the policy behind the federal law. So that's the nuance of the legal argument that we're dealing with right now at the federal level. We also pled the Nuremberg Code and the principles behind the Nuremberg Code. A lot of people, on the left specifically, tried to make fun of that. But that's all about informed consent. That's all about an individual not being forced to put a drug in their body without their consent. And when you say to someone, you either have your job or you take this experimental drug, well, that's not truly informed consent, in my opinion.
No, not at all. Especially when there's a non-0% chance that you'll get myocarditis or Guillain-Barré syndrome. Like you can't, but it's unlike anything, because like you can't talk out about it. If the foremost experts in the world talk out about it, they get censored. Like if there's no recourse they literally have no liability against this. And they don't even have to sell it at like market price. It's not like World War II where they're going around to the defense contractors and kind of saying, hey, you get this percentage of profit and this only because we're fighting the Nazis. Like that's not even a thing. Like they're raking it in. So with that, is there any way, does this seem, and I don't know if you'd be able to answer this or if this is even within the scope of this conversation, but it does kind of seem like this weird like showdown of titans where it's like this almost in a weird way will sort of like, and this is an odd take, unite the left and the right, because as it concerns to Roe v. Wade, it's like now we decide for good, is there bodily autonomy? And it's no, I get an abortion, but you have to take the jab. No. Okay, well, I don't want the jab. It's my body, my choice. Okay. Is it a weird thing where kind of both people are the bluffs are being called, the masks are falling off, and it's like, how hardcore are you? What do you believe in?
Well, that's exactly right, Tommy. And that's something that I've noticed from day one is that those on the left who are constantly arguing for abortion rights, suddenly when it comes to bodily autonomy here and the right to make a choice with respect to your body and whether or not you want an experimental drug placed in it that you can't get rid of, suddenly that's no longer a viable choice or decision. So there's a complete contradiction that we're seeing on the left and for those that are pro-abortion. You nailed it on the head. And to go back to something else that you said as you were talking about the drug companies and things of that nature, what's also very unique about this EUA product that's being administered is, let's say you do have an adverse reaction, that there is an adverse consequence, whether it be myocarditis, and the whole host of other things that have been linked to this particular jab. Well, you're limited to a very narrow set of remedies under what's called the PrEP Act. And so it's an administrative body that's created to address injuries resulting from the COVID-19 injection. And unlike a typical drug case where you might have a drug, let's say Vandia, whatever, you name it, some of the big cases that we've seen, your damages are extremely limited. So we had a case where a young man, 16 years of age and prime of his life, great health, athlete, thought his school was going to require him to take the jab. So he decided I'm going to go do it. I'm going to get it. Dad wasn't that informed on it. So a neighbor took the jab. Within 48 hours, he had a heart attack and died. Now that individual, when you file their claim in the PrEP Act, because he was only 16, doesn't have any lost wages, because he died almost immediately and didn't have any real medical bills, his life is valued at zero under the PrEP Act, zero. And so going back to what you said about the drug companies, taxpayer dollars are funding it. They're funding all of these jabs. And then when there's an adverse consequence or reaction, there's almost complete immunity when you try to hold them accountable for it. So I mean, it's just awful, the scenario that's been created for individuals across this country.
I've heard from, and I'm lucky enough in that I've worked my ass off to have this podcast so that I can be my own boss and do whatever I want. For people, I have heard that I talked to Jennifer Bridges the other day, the nurse from, I believe, Methodist. She said, and I've heard this before, don't quit, get fired. Is there like a mode of action? Is there like a, stop, drop, and roll? Is there like something that physicians should know about, hey, I'm going to kind of get, like civil disobedience where you get like peacefully arrested? Is there something they should know about how to go about this to set themselves up legally in the best possible way? Like, I'm an idiot. If it was me, I'd start screaming about the Nuremberg Code and, throwing punches and threatening people, and I would just be completely off. So it wouldn't work. For these more well-respected, well-rounded, stable physicians who know what they're doing and are, truly believe in what they're doing and are willing to act on that, is there a way to go? Like, it's still bad, but is there a way to make it a controlled demolition instead of just getting knocked over?
Well, and yeah, Jennifer is a hero, and she's one of our clients, our lead plaintiff in the Methodist case at the Fifth Circuit right now. But, individuals like her, they're warriors on the front lines, actually, putting their values to walking the walk. I mean, she lost her job and as a result of taking a strong principled stand, but she didn't sit down and shut up. She just got more vocal and started educating people on what was going on. But looking at her case is a great example. So you have a situation where they told her that she needed to have the jab by a certain date. And if you didn't take it by that date, then you were on administrative leave. And that was the 14-day period where they tried to starve you out. And they wanted to see what it would feel like for you to not have a paycheck. And then, hey, if you do it within these 14 days, you'll keep your job. But for those 14 days, let's see if you enjoy not having a paycheck. So awful. I mean, I just outrageous. You can't even do that in this country, but it is what it is. And that's why we're going to court. But the point is, though, don't quit. If you quit, then they come back with the argument, well, you just quit. So you didn't have to battle that. Even though it's constructive termination, you don't even want to have to deal with that argument. So you know, stand up. And another thing to be sensitive to, because a lot of people have sincerely held religious beliefs in this area, and the employer has to provide an option for you to file a religious or medical exemption. So not only do you want to challenge the policy, but if you do have a sincerely held religious belief that prevents you from taking the jab, then you need to request an exemption. And then you look at what the reasonable accommodation is. If you have a medical condition that you believe it qualifies you, then you should submit it too and let them reject it if they're going to reject it. And then you have an opportunity then to pursue the offender under different statutes. And so, if you are terminated, though, you do have a duty to mitigate your damages, meaning just look for another job. And like in Jennifer's case, she was able to find employment afterwards, and because there are others that actually believe what we believe in that field and in other fields. So don't quit if they're trying to, that's what they want you to do. They want you to just quit. And then later when you come back and you want to hold them responsible, their position is always, well, you just quit. We can't help it that you wanted to quit. And so don't quit. That's the answer to that question.
Clearly, I have no legal expertise, so you'll have to entertain my softball question. So I was a biology major. Is there any way you could frame this, because disproportionately, Black people and people of color have gotten the jab at much lower percentages than Caucasians or Asians? And I mean, I would imagine you could go back to the Tuskegee experiments and validate their reasoning. Is there any way this could be framed, because it's disproportionately effective or affected against them? Is there any way you could frame that this is a hate crime? Now, that's not something I personally believe, but seeing as how that's used every day now for something, if I'm a lawyer, I'm going to go, hey, I'm going to use any weapon I can. Could you not argue that, hey, disproportionately Black people are being fired? Is that not an argument, or is that going low?
It definitely is an argument that could be made in terms of disparate impact upon African Americans, Hispanics, or a group of individuals that don't take the jab in as high of numbers. Haven't seen it done yet, but definitely it's, I know, been talked about across the country with lawyers that are handling these types of cases. But it's definitely something that would potentially be viable.
I would be a terrible lawyer.
No, you would. You take your science background with the legal background, it would be fabulous.
Jump right into it. I'll go to war. For this, is there any argument that could be made? And I hate these sort of like tiptoe arguments where people are like, how about if if I can sue Pfizer, then I'll take it. And it's like, well, no, you're still giving in. They took a mile and now you're agreeing on half a mile. And it's like, no, you don't get anything. Just like I shouldn't get anything from them. So, but there are things like, hey, natural immunity should count. Like I've had COVID. So like natural immunity should count, which I still hate, because it's like, no, we're not asking permission for anything. Stop. And then, it's people that get the vaccine cards and they're like, hey man, I got a fake. And it's like, when you present it, you are giving into it. So that being said, I'm now going to propose the very thing I just argued against. Could it be argued that until Pfizer releases all of the data, which they don't want to release for 75, and now I believe 55 years, and I know it's been brought down and judges are saying it's got to be out in 5 months, but that seems like it's all still up in the air. Is there any argument that could be made that you can't mandate something if we're not even allowed to know it's in? I mean, we've already accepted like sheep that we can't sue them. Could you not make that argument? You at the very least have to disclose what's in it. And again, I hate that argument because I'm more of a no, just no, none. But because it's more nuanced than that, is there any validity in that?
Absolutely. And in fact, that's one of the arguments that we're making at the Fifth Circuit right now, is if you look at the fact sheets, you look at the information, much of the material that's in the product is proprietary. So you don't know what you're getting. And so how can you give informed consent when you don't even know what's in the proprietary concoction of the injection that's being placed in your body? So I think they have some real challenges there, in my opinion. Secondly, going back to a point that you made, if you even want to sue the drug company, there's a legislation in place that protects them. And it makes it extremely difficult to get around the hurdles that have been put in place to sue a Pfizer or a Moderna or J&J. And so created a situation where it's extremely difficult for an individual who has an adverse reaction or is killed as a result of taking the jab to actually pursue a remedy in a court of law against the manufacturer of a drug. And so I've never seen that happen before. I mean, you don't have that with respect to almost any drug that I'm aware of out there, where you have this type of immunity as a corporation, a private corporation that's making trillions of dollars off a drug that you're placing in the market. And so it's a situation in my mind that is legally inconsistent with what we've seen over the past 100 years of jurisprudence, which is completely unequitable in terms of favoring the drug makers, meaning they get all the taxpayer dollars to fund the drug. And then if something goes wrong, they can't be held accountable. And so it's just a situation that I think we're going to have to ultimately address at the highest court of the land. And we'll see what happens there. As you know, we've seen the two decisions that came out recently, the OSHA decision, which was favorable, and then you saw the CMS decision, which was not as favorable. But again, that was a 5-4 decision, and that only dealt with the injunction that was in place as a result of the Louisiana court and the Missouri court. And the Fifth Circuit the lower courts had ruled in our favor against the mandate, and then the Supreme Court removed the injunction with respect to the CMS mandate, and they're expecting briefing on the merits. But these are battles that we're going to continue to fight. I was happy about the OSHA result, not pleased with the CMS result, but that battle's not finished.
For jobs that give you health insurance, but no one's responsible for what happens if you get the jab, just like Pfizer, just like whatever, Bob's Auto Parts. But you do have health insurance for, you have a heart attack, but completely 10 years ago, forget even the vaccines, you have a heart attack and, whatever, you're an executive at Walmart, like you do have, they pay for this, not just sick leave, but you also get just health insurance, right? How does that tie in? Do they have to start ciphering through your own health issues? Bob got cancer. Okay. Like Walmart, we have whatever Walmart care. We'll provide help on that. Or, you got in a car accident, it wasn't your fault. We'll provide, whatever, you have a broken femur. Are they going to have to start going through and saying, this is myocarditis, we don't do that. This is a broken elbow, we do that. Do you see any path with that? And again, you'll have to excuse my softball question.
No, it's not a softball question, because that particular issue hasn't really been brought to the higher courts yet. And so we know it's coming. For instance, another issue that's similar to that is what we're dealing with when an employer forces you to take the shot and you have an adverse reaction. And the question is that covered by workers' comp or not? We're also having another issue that we're fighting all across the state of Texas right now. When someone is terminated for refusing to take the jab, are they entitled to unemployment compensation? And it's like in the Methodist cases, they're fighting our folks left and right. And so we've been successful in most of those cases right now, but we've gotten a few adverse rulings from one only administrative judge regarding unemployment benefits. So all of the initial action of taking the shot is resulting in a plethora of litigation in so many different areas, starting at the administrative level, at a county level, at the state court, federal courts, and then ultimately you're seeing it in circuit courts all across the country and the United States Supreme Court. So it's really become a whole new area of jurisprudence. I call it COVID-19 jurisprudence because it didn't exist before March of 2020. And now you're seeing thousands of cases all around the country as a result of fact patterns that are arising for the first time in the history of our country.
Yeah. Could you even argue in sort of a different way about the runaway effect this could have on private hospitals? If we're all saying, let's just go with, let's say we're for this argument, we go, yeah, no, it doesn't stop the transmission of it, but you should still get it because we're overflowing hospitals for other needed operations and procedures. Are we opening the door, or could you argue that the door is being opened for private hospitals to start saying, if you're unvaxxed, you can't come in? every admitting patient's also going to start taking a breathalyzer.
Well, yeah, that's good point. I mean, and that is coming. I mean, that's a battle that we're going to be fighting, especially in the more liberal states.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, that's happening because we have, in states like Florida, even in Texas, and the more conservative states, we have governors that are standing up and issuing executive orders that protect from certain things like that happening. But you are starting to see it in California, New York, places like that where they're very far left. So, that's going to play out first, probably in the executive order context. But these executive orders, like we have in Texas, a governor will come in and they'll issue a disaster proclamation. And that disaster proclamation will be good for 30 days. And the governor continues to renew it every 30 days. The only way to remove the disaster proclamation is for the legislature to do so or the governor to do so. So in the interim, while that proclamation is in effect, the governor, at least in Texas, has sweeping powers to issue these executive orders under something called the Texas Disaster Act of 1974. But once that disaster declaration ends, once he refuses to renew it for the next 30 days or the legislature pulls it back, which is unlikely to happen in Texas, then we're dealing with a whole lot of counties that are much more liberal than maybe our state elected officials are. So for instance, mask mandates. We've got an executive order right now in place that says that ISDs, independent school districts, cannot force kids to wear masks. Well, we've got in the more liberal areas like Houston, Harris County, Dallas County, Bexar County, which is San Antonio, those ISDs are just ignoring the governor's order. And so and therefore say, come sue us. And so all of those cases right now are going to the Texas Supreme Court. We've been successful in stopping them, but every single time the governor puts something in place, the left just says, we don't care what you say, governor. We're going to do what we think is best. Come sue us. And think about the message that sends to school kids. If they see their ISD standing up and just thumbing their nose at the governor's orders, then why would a school kid not say, well, my teacher, I don't have to listen to my teacher. You don't listen to your boss. Why should I listen to my superior, which is the teacher? It's just a horrible message that we're sending to school children all across the state of Texas and across the nation.
There's another, almost comical thing about the whole vaccine mandates and abortion, the autonomy. Man, if we're going to argue that the unvaxxed are putting a strain on our hospitals, should we start checking for IDs? Why should illegal immigrants take up health? And I personally don't believe, it's as much as I don't have the answer, I also just don't like the idea of anyone being turned down at an emergency room. I've been to them, not even conscious. I understand life-saving treatment. But are we getting to this weird thing where is the left opening the door for an argument about strain on hospitals? We can't, where's your ID? We got to save this for Americans. We got to save this for responsible Americans. You could have just got the vax. You could have just got a green card. Is that where we're going? Do we test your blood? Do we take your BMI? Ooh, you're coming in here. Okay, broken leg, that's fine. Oh, you having chest pains though? Oh, you got some love handles, buddy. Let's check those triglycerides. I don't think so. I'm sorry about that. Hey, you can take it up with a lawyer. But 21 years ago, when the COVID 2022 precedent was set in the Supreme Court, listen, this is just what it is now. It's going to be, are they going to refer to it as like Roe v. Wade? It's going to be like COVID v. whatever. Is this where we're going? And is it again, an almost comical thing about now we have people like myself who are more conservative leaning saying you can't shut the ER to anyone. And you have people on the left saying it's about the greater good and the health of the Americans. And it's like, I don't even disagree with you, but like, where the hell are we going? Is this just God or the universe having fun with us? And that's not even a legal question. I guess that's a philosophical hypothesis, but.
Well, but you hit the nail on the head. Their arguments are completely inconsistent. And so, in the abortion context, couldn't be a better example. And so they want to have it one way in one context and the exact opposite way philosophically in the context that fits their political narrative or their worldview. And that's the problem that the left has.
But even ourselves, we're having, I'm pro-life, but no, you can't put that in my body. This is my kingdom. And it's like, hey, okay, I get what you're saying, but yeah, man, it's a weird thing. And I'm as pro corporation as you can get them. Go out, hustle, go get it. And yet here I am arguing till I'm red in the face about how a private corporation shouldn't be able to profit off a product that I need to enter polite society. It's this weird, in the weirdest way. It's almost like COVID is like the most unlikely glue that might actually force us to reconcile with our differences and see how they really are just parallels of one another. Um, I mean, could you go one step further and say if people of color are disproportionately affected by this by losing their jobs? I mean, could you not just start with like a defund the CDC,
Yeah,
defund the FDA? Why not start those chants?
that could definitely happen. I mean, and because, and then as you know, the biggest thing I'm seeing here too, and you take this all the way back to elections, going back to the presidential election, is you have folks using COVID as an opportunity to move forward a political agenda that they want. It's an excuse for everything on the left, if you ask me. So again, going back to the elections, we saw states and individuals in states, whether that be a governor, a clerk, and we saw it here in Harris County big time, unilaterally making up their own rules that were inconsistent with the election code of that particular state and saying, okay, you can vote by mail in this situation, or we're going to extend early voting hours or days by this many weeks. All of these things that were completely inconsistent with what the legislature did. And why that's important is because the United States Constitution in Article 1, Section 4 makes it very clear that it is the state legislatures that are responsible for determining what the rules are with respect to their state's elections and federal and Senate and House of Representatives races, which trickles down. And so the point, I guess, here is that you're seeing the left use COVID-19 as an opportunity to achieve whatever the goal or agenda is for them, whether that be elections, whether that be, it's all about control is what it really boils down to. It's all about controlling individuals, and that's what's got to stop. And so that's why we need elected officials that are going to take a stand and pass legislation that prevents this craziness. Like in Texas, I'm shocked that we still haven't passed a piece of legislation that says you cannot terminate someone for refusing to take an EUA product. I mean, how that cannot pass is beyond me when you've got a governor that's passed an executive order that says you can't do it. But when we try to memorialize it or codify it in the form of a statute, it doesn't pass. And then you've got your lobby, all pushing, whether it be Pfizer or others, doing everything they can to push state reps, whether that be arguably conservative Republicans backing down on it too. So, the whole thing right now is, as you know, still sorting itself out in the courts. But, we need to hold these people accountable. I mean, the folks that came in and shut down churches and violated our First Amendment rights for many, many months, if not, a year, then those elected officials need to be held accountable. Those businesses that were destroyed when people put their life savings into them, those people that need to be held accountable, because too many rights have been trampled on and violated for us to just say, oh, let's move on. Oh, that was a pandemic. We're not going to have that happen again. Let's just forget about the past. And so now it's going to be a lot more about accountability, about holding those individuals responsible for what they did during the pandemic, for trampling on those rights, for taking away those jobs, for closing those businesses, for messing with the election system. And unfortunately, there are going to be people on both sides that need to be held accountable for that, because it's not just Democrats that were doing it. There were some Republicans too that were very quick to say, let's shut down those places of worship. It's too scary for people to exercise their faith as a corporate body. And we had that happen everywhere. We had it happen in Texas and some of the most conservative states. But everybody wants to be now, every Republican at least wants to be Ron DeSantis 2.0. And you go back, look at their history. They weren't Ron DeSantis 2.0 until Governor DeSantis started making those bold moves. And so they want you to ignore what they did the first year of COVID-19. And we can't forget that, because it'll happen again.
Yeah, it will. And I know you got to run in 2 minutes. So we'll close this out with, in your experience, because obviously you have experience in law, and so you have a better look at this than I do, at the 30,000 foot view, I mean, really zoomed out, is this just another growing pain of America, just like Civil War, just like segregation, just like World War II, just like Vietnam, the hippies versus the greatest generation? Is this just another growing pain in your mind?
That's an interesting way to describe it. It is a pain, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And it is abuse of power. It is a trampling on the rights that so many sacrificed or paid the ultimate price for us to afford and enjoy today. And when we don't stand against these abuses, we dishonor the memory of those individuals who did pay the ultimate price for us to be able to say, I don't want an experimental drug placed in my body in order to work.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to. So it is a pain, and it is something that we are experiencing the first time in the history of our country. You can go back to smallpox and other things of that nature, but it's very different than what we're dealing with today, and to the extent that science has progressed so much, and that we actually have laws that say you cannot force someone to put an experimental drug in their body without informed consent. Yet at the same time, we are forcing people to put an experimental drug in their body without informed consent by saying to them, if you want to work, if you want to travel, if you want to participate in society, then you're going to have to put this drug in your body. And that's someplace I don't think our founding fathers envisioned us ever going. But that's where we find ourselves today. And that's why we need patriots all across the country, folks like you and others, to stand up, to speak up, to refuse to give up, because the only way we lose is if we sit down and shut up. And so that's our message to lawyers, to activists, to individuals, that we lose if we remain silent. We lose if we remain complacent. We lose if we are afraid to be politically incorrect. And so thank God we have good folks like Jennifer Bridges, like Dr. McCullough, Dr. Malik, like yourself and others who aren't afraid. And that's the way we win this battle, by those patriots standing up and not being afraid and not backing down.
Yeah, I guess my sense of optimism comes from, like, it's definitely bad, but I also think, like, could you even wrap your head around right now, like, the 101st Airborne being sent to escort black kids into school? Can you even imagine what would happen if the National Guard went to Kent State and shot college students?
Mhm.
But we got through it. I'm not saying that they weren't, for nothing, but I look at that and I'm like, that's pretty hardcore. That's insane. And we had riots. We had riots because of Chauvin killing Floyd, and, like, bad. Imagine the National Guard holding MacBooks on, whatever, like, Duke's campus. Imagine, like, the Snapchat videos of National Guard shooting students. But that's nowhere near happening. So I can only imagine that where we are now, in 30 years, someone will be doing a podcast and being like, can you imagine how hardcore that would be if you actually saw people saying, where are your papers, only 80 years after the Holocaust? I guess that's where my sense of hope is. But then I also see where we are right now, and I realize those weren't just growing pains. There was a trillion little tiny stories like our conversation right now that were happening. They just weren't recorded. So,
And, fast forward 30 years from now, we will know the long-term consequences of
yeah,
this.
yeah.
And
No.
imagine if they want to give it to 5-year-olds now. Imagine if we find out some horrific thing is happening 10, 15 years after you take the shot. Imagine what the repercussions are going to be for that, from that. And so I think only time is going to tell us what the ultimate repercussions are going to be with respect to individuals' health. We know there are lots of issues right now in the short term, but what does the 10, 15, 20, 30-year window look like? We don't know. We know that the studies are telling us it's not going to look good with respect to reproductive health and things of that nature. But then we're going to come back and we're going to say, oh yeah, we forced 12-year-old girls to take this experimental jab. And guess what? Here are the problems and the repercussions that they're now experiencing in their 20s and their 30s. That is one of the biggest concerns I have right now.
It's gonna be like growing up and having like
And
that.
so many parents, Tommy, so many parents are like, just, oh yeah, I'm sure. Dr. Fauci told me to do it. I'm going to go do it. They don't even question it. They don't even look at one study. All they do is watch CNN and hear Dr. Fauci and MSNBC pundits saying it, and they do it. You'd be shocked how many people I've found in that situation where they can't wait to get in line to put their 12-year-old, so their 12-year-old can get the jab. And I never thought I would see the day when a parent would be so uneducated with respect to the health of their child. And that to me is shocking.
I think it's going to be as absurd as growing up and being like, yeah, man, like Bob's grandpa, he still thinks that like getting rid of segregation was a mistake. Like everyone had that friend growing up, like, dude, love my grandpa, but he's kind of a piece of shit about that. He's still angry about like MLK. People knew those people, you know, where it's like, and I'm sure you go back 100 years, there'd be guys be like World War I, like, dude, my grandpa still thinks that like the South should have won the Civil War. I can only imagine what because we will know. We will know. And I don't know who it will be. Maybe I'll be on the wrong side. Be like, dude, Tommy thought we shouldn't have got the vaccine. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm the guy that's like, for the whatever. But I feel like that's what it's going to be. It's going to be like, dude, Bob's grandpa, he still talks about like the dirty unvaxxed plague rats. To be like, dude, that's so, you can't say that. It's 2050, grandpa. You can't say that. Like, we're a progressive society. You can't hate people for not getting an experimental jab. But back when my day, we put people in their place. And it's like, all right, grandpa, you've had too much to drink. Like, I feel like that's where it's going. But I've kept you 5 minutes longer than I said I would. So
You've been great. I really appreciate you having me on, Tommy.
yeah, man, I'd love to have you on again sometime. Mr.
I'd love to come back.
Jared Woodfill. Thank
you, my friend.
I'll send you the episode when it's up. God bless and take care, everybody.